You need to get some.
I think you got one for each, yeah. Hold on. I can put that.
Well, hello, everybody. We're going to start. So this is Dr. Vakil. He's going to be speaking today. He's one of our nephrologists over at the hospital, talking about kidney and the heart. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Vakil. We really appreciate you coming and talking, and he has a great presentation and knowledge to share with everybody.
Just click on the slide or?
Yeah, so I didn't know which way you wanted to do it, so you can,
Sure.
do the mouse, or I think, yeah, you can just go forward and back.
All right.
So,
Hi, guys. Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me here. I really appreciate the ability to talk kidneys anytime. And no one at my house listens to me, so this is really wonderful to talk about kidneys to a group that's interested. So, really what I want to talk about today is the kidneys and heart are very much related, and we're going to see actually how this has been rebranded even the past year. When we learn about the heart and kidney in my training, we talked about something called cardiorenal syndrome, and just in the past year, there's been changes to the terminology to make it much more unison how they're both interconnected. So hopefully there's some little bit insights on how that can help our health. So if we were to think about the heart and kidneys, I would say most people believe that the heart is going to be the pump, the thing that really drives our blood flow, our oxygenated blood. And the kidney is sometimes, sorry, that makes sense. Let's see, so maybe we can go to display settings, and there we go. All right, maybe, how do you swap? Yeah, maybe swap it.
Did anyone else need the PowerPoint from today?
Oh, but I think here, okay, perfect, yeah.
so just the up and down there.
All right, so if there are any questions I forgot to mention, please, usually when I'm talking to folks, it's one-on-one interaction. So having just a room full of folks, I'm happy to break down with any questions that pop up during our presentation. So when we think about the kidneys, a lot of times folks will think it's a filter, which it is. It's a filter of the water-soluble blood that we have, but it's a lot more as well. And so it really is going to be, the way that I think of it, it's a blood pressure regulator. It's an oxygen sensor. It manages our electrolytes and our acid base. And even in hormonal production, things like vitamin D, it plays a crucial role. So it's a really complicated organ. And one very fascinating thing, if you were to look at the body at rest, so when we're sitting, not moving around, we think of the body consuming energy, or the currency of energy is something called ATP. And the two organs that use the most energy at rest are the heart and the kidneys. And so, the heart is constantly pumping. The body is full of water, and the kidneys have to clean the entire body's water, but they can't just filter and let go of that water. If they do so, we would be in the bathroom constantly, but they're working very hard to take the good part of that water, bring it back into our circulation, and just concentrate the toxins. So I really want to emphasize the point that these are two demanding organs for energy, and that's why we see a lot of issues with our chronic conditions affecting them. And so the cardiorenal syndrome is a term that was coined in 2008 by an Italian nephrologist, and this is how we learned about how the heart and the kidneys are related. This terminology, it's more of a chicken and the egg type of terminology. It tries to pinpoint if there's something wrong with the heart, how it affects the kidney, or if there's something wrong with the kidney, how it affects the heart. But it's not necessarily the most useful term when we think about how these things are in unison. And they both, we see diseases occur in both of these states, in both these organs together. And so I want to talk about, what's the epidemiology, we see that despite this term coming out in 2008, kidney disease is getting worse. So we learned that 11% of all people have kidney disease in the United States. That was in 2020. In 2023, it's now 1 in 9. So it's getting even worse, or 1 in 7. So it's up from 1 in 9. The other very interesting thing, when people come to my clinic, what they say is, I pee very normally, how can I have kidney disease? And so 90% of folks that have kidney disease don't know they have kidney disease. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we diagnose it, but it's unfortunately an asymptomatic, well, good and bad that you don't have symptoms necessarily, but when you do have symptoms, a lot of times it's too late. And so that's where we want to try to address the conditions before it gets too late, because unfortunately, when it is an organ that has failed and requiring a machine, the machine has not changed too much in the past 60 years. And so we see that 35% of folks live 5 years on dialysis. And if you have diabetes, it's even worse at 25% of folks. And so, when I started my practice, I was working in kidney transplants, and that's where I worked at University of Minnesota. That's the best treatment we can offer for folks with kidney disease. And it's not available to everyone. There's always 100,000 people in the United States needing a kidney transplant on the wait list, and there's about 25,000 transplants per year. And even when I was working as a transplant nephrologist, a transplant kidney doctor, you realize that if we can prevent this from happening, it would be so much more impactful. And so that's kind of a big reason I wanted to move out to St. Cloud. And I've been here since 2019. And so we want to now talk about more updates. So we talk about how cardiorenal syndrome was coined in 2008. In 2023, so October of 2023, the president of the American Heart Association and the scientific committee recommended that we group cardiovascular, kidney, and even metabolic syndrome all together into one term, because there's a high burden of disease that we see where patients have all three of these conditions. And so what I'm talking about is relatively new. Many of the doctors that we are, my colleagues, that we work with every day, we are very specialized. We are heart doctors and kidney doctors, and there's endocrinology doctors. But I really, really love the approach from the American Heart Association and how they're making it a little bit more unifying, because these are not independent conditions. And so there's a little diagram of what is the leading cause of mortality. And if we were to look in 2016, having ischemic heart disease, so the blood supply being low to the heart and causing heart failure, that's the leading cause of mortality, why people die. In 2040, it's projected to still be the leading cause of mortality, but we see much higher incidences of diabetes and kidney disease popping up as well. And so this is a diagram showing how each of these conditions are an illness on their own, but there's actually a major portion of overlap between all three of them. And I'll also tell you that the science is very fascinating to learn about, because it's not just heart, kidney, and diabetes that we see unison. we see cancer and we see cognitive decline, probably all, as well lumped into the science here. And so this is very fascinating stuff for me. And again, I'm happy to talk more and more about any questions you guys have. But let's talk what metabolic syndrome is, because that's that third part of this condition. And so metabolic syndrome are 5 different, the way we diagnose it are 5 different types of signs or lab tests. They include cholesterol testing, they include blood sugar testing, blood pressure testing, our waist circumference. And so if you have 3 out of these 5 conditions, technically, that's how we pick up metabolic syndrome. When I'm in clinic, the first thing I do for the folks I see is I look at those conditions. And it's so interesting for me that almost 100% of the people I see in clinic are going to have 3, 4, 5 of these conditions, meaning a systolic blood pressure, that blood pressure greater than 135, an A1C or fasting blood sugar that's in that pre-diabetes range, a little bit of truncal obesity around the trunk area, a low HDL, a high triglyceride. I mean, it's almost where I can build a timeline of where these chronic conditions are occurring based off laboratory tests that our primary care doctors were all checking. And so, it's just very fascinating to see the patterns to me. And I'm very happy that we can have, even in our society, a little bit of unison. Because when we look at, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these conditions in metabolic syndrome, we see on this graph here higher incidences, higher prevalence of kidney disease and protein in the urine. And so these are the 2 ways that we think about kidney function. And so when we also look at a new calculator that came out in 2023, this is a calculator that predicts 10 and 30-year risk scores for having cardiovascular events, having a heart attack, having a stroke. And if you look at the new calculators that came out last year, having low kidney function and having protein in the urine are 2 of the risk factors that they've integrated. So, again, a lot of unison between these 3 different conditions, but let's go a little bit deeper into what exactly kidney disease is. How do we look at this asymptomatic condition? And so many of you guys may have heard of the term creatinine. Creatinine is a waste product by our muscles. And so everybody has creatinine in their body. And based on that creatinine level, we can look at what the kidney filtration is. So the more filtration that you're filtering out this waste product in the blood, the lower the creatinine. But if you see high levels of the creatinine in the blood, it's indicating that there's low filtration. So there's an inverse relationship between these 2 values you're going to see. One is creatinine. So the higher it is, the lower the estimated glomerular filtration rate is. That's what EGFR is referring to, estimated glomerular filtration rate. It's a little tongue twister, but that's how we, the kidney is more than a filter, but that's how we keep score of how the kidney is doing, is how much it's filtering. I'm going to show on this slide here what the ranges are. So typically when we're born, the kidney filtration rate when we're young is around 120 milliliters per minute. As we age, we do see, you take a very healthy person at 60, they're going to have a little bit of scarring on their kidney biopsy. So we do know there's some age-related decline, probably about 1 milliliter per minute per year. Once it go below 60 milliliters per minute, meaning that you're filtering a little bit less than 60 milliliters per minute, we start to see more advanced stages of kidney disease. And so we group them into different stages. Someone in a stage 1 kidney function, they have very, very high filtration, but we might diagnose them with kidney disease just because they could be born with 1 kidney, for instance. And so because there's an imaging abnormality, we would say that, this person has a kidney disease, but they're very good filtration. But as you get lower and lower and lower in your filtration, we go into different stages. And they don't really list the stages on this, this schematic, but between 30 to 60 and 15 to 30. And, most people that require dialysis, they're going to be at around 10 for a long period of time. And that's usually when they're going to need dialysis or a machine to help with the kidney filtration, supplement that kidney filtration. Let's see here. So in clinic, how I describe the creatinine or the kidney filters, if you guys wanted to test your coffee filters, you would brew some coffee. You would take some water, pour it over the filter, and you would see how it's working. I mean, that's how it makes sense to look at a filter. We don't do that in medicine. We could, it's a research thing, but it's a very cumbersome way to look at the kidney filtration. So there are research institutions that use radio-labeled dyes, and they inject it, and you watch the kidney filter out that radio-labeled dye in real time. But no clinical laboratories are set up for that. So what we do, measuring creatinine, measuring a waste product that's just circulating in the blood, think of it like, instead of looking at the coffee filter directly, we open up the cupboard and we look at how many coffee beans are in there. So it's a little bit confusing of a concept, but know that this blood test is an estimate. It's not a perfect test, and many variables can affect how much creatinine is in the blood. For instance, the diet, the hydration status, the amount of muscle mass on the body. So this is the most common reason we see folks in clinic, is because someone has checked a creatinine level in the blood and it's high. And we estimate that the kidney function may be low, but it takes a little bit of digging around to really figure out what's going on. And so that's the creatinine number that many of you guys will see in your blood work. The other number that we get referred to is having protein in the urine. And when I talk about protein in the urine, almost immediately folks ask, is that a good thing or a bad thing to have protein in the urine? And it's a scary thing. It's a very scary thing when you see protein in the urine, and I want to explain what that is.
I don't think we have
So on the numbers here, these are your basic liver function tests. The liver, when you get your labs tested, they may check like a comprehensive metabolic panel. They may check your liver function. The liver function gives you a total protein level. Those total protein in your body, it's going to be mainly something called albumin and globulins. That's what makes up our protein circulating around in our blood. If you were to spread the protein out, and that's exactly what they do in this test called an electrophoresis, which I show here, you can see that the albumin, which is this really big spike, that's the biggest component of the protein circulating in our blood. that albumin, it goes really close to this positive charge because it's a charged protein. It's a negatively charged protein. So, just like when you take two magnets and there's a positive end and a negative end, and you bring them a little bit closer, that negative charge is an important characteristic of this protein. And the size of it's an important characteristic. The reason we care about protein in the urine is because it's a sign of kidney disease, an early sign of kidney disease. And we're going to talk about it. But when we talk about protein, again, a lot of folks wonder, how much protein they should be eating, and does that play a role? And so we're not necessarily talking about protein consumption. I want to break down some of the myths and things that we commonly hear about. And so what is protein? So protein, it's in many of our foods. What it is think of it like blocks of amino acids. Think of it like Legos, where you start to build together anything you want based off of these different types of amino acids. So it's chains and chains of amino acids. They're folded up together, and these proteins have all kinds of functions in the body. The very interesting thing is every single amino acid has nitrogen in it. That's in the backbone of a protein of an amino acid molecule. Nitrogen is a waste product. You have to get rid of it as a waste product if you don't use it. So if you use the protein, it gets incorporated into the body, in the cells. It has a lot of important functions. But if we're not using it, the nitrogen in the amino acids that we consume cannot be stored automatically. We don't automatically put on muscle. And so that nitrogen, it's a waste product, and that's what the kidney function is all about. It's how do we get rid of that waste? That's urea. That's what essentially the urea or the BUN you might see on your blood test. It's blood urea nitrogen. It's a marker of the nitrogen waste product. All right, so back to the albumin. The reason, so this is a beautiful, to me, this is a beautiful figure. This is called the glomerulus, that filter. This is a scanning electron microscope, meaning so it's the highest resolution microscope, and they've colored it. But I remember when I was a kid studying biology, I had this thing on my textbook for physiology, and my grandfather, I remember he was a doctor, but he had a stroke and he couldn't talk he had a difficult time talking, and he saw this picture on my textbook and he said glomerulus, and I thought that was so cool. He could barely say any words, but this is the big unit of the kidney, where we get the filtration. And so what I want you to pay attention is when you have a healthy kidney filter, you have these things called podocytes. Podocytes, you don't have to necessarily know the terms, but that's what makes our kidney filters. They're kind of, think of them like a fried egg, and then it kind of makes these fingers off of it, and there's more fingers, and they kind of interdigit with each other. So what I want to show you, though, is between the slits where the arrow is pointing, the size and the charge between that slit, that's the same size and the same charge as albumin, that protein that we're talking about high in the blood. Okay, it's the same size and it's the same charge. And if you've ever taken two magnets and you try to put two negative ends together, you know it's pretty difficult. And that's why it's important that we measure protein in the urine, because when we see albumin go from that blood supply into the urine, it's an early indication that there's something wrong with the filter. There's something going on that you may not have those healthy little fingers being projected, and we need to explore this a little bit more. So essentially, the way I describe it, when we hook our blood pressure cuff up and we measure our arteries there, we're measuring the blood pressure in a very, 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 very big blood vessel in the heart, in your arms. When we think about the blood pressure in the kidneys, so there are 1 million glomeruli. There's 1 million filters in every single kidney. And so we're talking about measuring the blood pressure in a blood vessel that's a millionth the size. It's hard to even fathom, but it's such a tiny blood vessel, and we're trying to measure the pressure inside that blood vessel. And that's what the protein in the urine is. Think of it as a surrogate for the pressure in those tiny blood vessels of the kidneys. So if you put those two things together, how much you're filtering, which is over here, it's in the y-axis, the up and down axis. We start at 90 and go lower and lower and lower. And if you look at how much protein we're spilling, which is in this kind of horizontal axis, we know that if you have low filtration and a lot of pressure or a lot of protein leaking through the urine, we're more likely to develop kidney failure. This has been well studied and well known. And we our big organization that all nephrologists are part of is called the KDIGO, or the International Organization. This is something put out by them as a heat map. The folks that are highest risk, we can almost predict kidney failure based on those two variables, but it's not limited to kidney failure. And so it's a lot going on in this slide, but what I want to show you is that when you have low levels of kidney function and you have protein in the urine, all that red stuff we see here, it doesn't matter. So this side is people younger than 65. This side is higher than 65, and they've controlled for a lot of different things. We see that when you have those two conditions, there's more death from heart disease, and more need for dialysis. And so they're very, very, very important variables, and a big reason why we were referred, because when people start to see low kidney function or protein in the urine, we want to try to reverse this. So can we reverse this? How do we reverse this? This is the most important thing that we are working in unison. So this is why I'm so excited today. So a much better model of how the heart and kidney are related. It's very, very confusing schematic, but this is what they put out in the last year. And I love it. I think it's a really, really good, better representation of how our organs are related. And so we're going to walk through each of these stages, and we'll start here at stage 0. So this is someone that has no risk factors, nothing we're seeing in metabolic syndrome. Think of young kids typically, but even in young kids, we're seeing some of these risk factors start to develop. In the first stage of having cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome, what we see is excess fat tissue. Think of it like fat in the muscle. When we see fat in the muscle, it causes something called insulin resistance. And so you can visualize this based off the slices of meat that we have. But my wife, she was trying to learn this last night. But essentially, your Kobe, you got a lot of fat in the muscle there. That alone, you see extra fat in the muscle in some of the healthiest athletes in the world, and also folks with the lowest metabolic rate. It's a very interesting thing, but it really comes down to the ability to burn that energy. And when you have that extra fat in the muscle, so it's a U-shaped curve. So, there's a guy that studies this out of Colorado. He has been the coach for the Tour de France winner for a few years. And so he does muscle biopsies. He sees really healthy athletes have some fat in the muscle because they're burning it so quickly for energy. And he sees folks that cannot burn it also have a lot of fat in the muscle. When we see that fat in the muscle and insulin resistance, you start to think of folks with gestational diabetes, when they're in pregnancy and they have some high blood sugars, or, they may have some glucose intolerance. It's that insulin has a hard time doing its work because it gets blocked by some of that fat tissue. So that's the early stage. And so as you kind of go through the science, it's just so fascinating to learn this stuff. When we are taught very basic stuff, and in the media, you hear a lot about you got to burn more calories than you consume. But the science is different. The science, absolutely, calories are important, but it actually, our appetite comes from 3 different factors. So think of mass. Think of the body as something called fat-free mass. That is water. The water in our bodies are generally in our muscle and in our bones and our organs. And so the more and more fat-free mass we have, that's something that's labeled as tonic feedback. That's your metabolic rate. That's where we have all the work we do, putting muscle on, staying active, growing up, doing cartwheels, as little kids are doing and stuff. They're putting on muscle. They have a good appetite. That stimulates our appetite. Usually, as we put on fat mass, so adipose tissue, we have hormones that feed back to our brains saying, we've eaten enough, and that unfortunately develops resistance to that hormone. That's called leptin resistance. And so there's a balance between the fat-free mass and the fat mass in our body that regulates our metabolic rate and our appetite. And the third way we regulate our appetite comes from our stomach. And that's where all these medications we see, the Ozempics and the Mounjaros and the Wegovy's and some of the things you hear in the media about these medications, they all focus on the hormones from our stomach. And so as our stomach stretches out, we have a negative feedback as well to our appetite. And so, I like this kind of cartoon here. You can see Homer here holding a donut. That's going to have very little, and we hear all the time, and folks, they don't eat that much. How can I be gaining weight if I don't eat that much? And it really comes down to their muscle mass there for the burning of their energy. And when we do eat, very likely when you have something like a donut, it will not stretch that stomach out for a long enough period of time. So it's not going to necessarily fill you up like what I'm going to show on the next slide. So actually this any textbook you look at, any physiology textbook you look at, you can look at the water content of the body over our age. And so usually we lose water mass as we age. And so it may be as low as 50% by the time we hit, this kind of schematic diagram here. One really, really interesting study that came out in October, 2 months ago. So Mayo Clinic, what they did was they took very, very, very healthy patients. They were 50 to 80 years old, various different ages. They hooked them up to different sensors. They looked at we know that muscle mass declines as we age, but they wanted to look at where we lose muscle mass. They looked at their grip strength, how well they can kick, how well they walk, and they put them on some balance boards and had them stand on one foot. And what they see And if you look at the grip strength, it doesn't change much between 50 and 80. If you look at our walking, it changes a little bit. But if you look at the ability to stand on one leg, it's very, very difficult without kind of shaking around. Or if you look at with your eyes closed, just kind of standing, we start to wobble. That's our core muscles. That's where we start to lose our muscle mass between the ages of 50 and 80. That's where that water content and that resting metabolic rate is going down. It's a very fascinating study that just came out. And if we look at that stretching of the stomach, we can see that what we eat really, really, really matters in terms of how filling it is. If you take 500 calories of oil, 500 calories of some simple sugar, it's not the same as 500 calories of lettuce, which is not even possible. You know, you can't eat 500 calories of lettuce unless you buy 2 of those heads. All right, so stage 2. So as we kind of we talk a lot about that early stages of adiposity, so fat tissue, and as it starts to develop, then we start to see what we call metabolic syndrome. This is where a lot of our drugs come into play. We got drugs for your blood sugars, we have stuff for cholesterol and for blood pressure. But again, as you get 3 of these conditions, 4, 5, that's really the risk factors we see, and we diagnose it early with 3. There's a lot of science I'm talking about here. So again, this is very, very confusing stuff here. But I think it's important. I really, the way that I see this, I really think it's important that we talk a little bit about the science behind it. And so when we cook our food, you can put a steak on a pan, roast it, it turns black. You can cut an apple, as you take the skin away, it turns brown. That's called oxidation. That means you are applying heat in the terms of the steak, and you're speeding up some chemical reactions that react with oxygen. That chemical reaction, what we're saying is every single food, everything has nitrogen and carbon in it. And as you speed up the reactions, they start to combine with each other, it interacts with oxygen, you lose that color because it starts to interact with oxygen. What you're doing is you are making oxygen radicals. So again, this is confusing, but think of it like when we cook our food, you're almost communicating stress. It's like it's cold outside. We have to cook our food. Like we don't have a phone in our body to look at the temperature tomorrow, which I don't even know how it is, but you don't have that kind of ability to know what the temperature is tomorrow, but our food tells that. And so when we see the food has to be cooked and heated, and especially as you add oil and heat, you get more and more oxygen radicals. It's telling our body, start storing salt, start storing fat, start storing, sugar, because we don't know what the weather is. But when you add color to that food, you are communicating things are abundant. There's plenty of, there's no stress going on. And so, you don't need to worry so much about so the little cartoons about storing. So this is just fascinating stuff. We see a lot of the science come out probably 2008 when the term ultra processed food came out. So there was a Brazilian scientist that coined the term ultra processed food, and he saw that our food very much is leading to these chronic conditions. If you go to the nitty-gritty science behind it, it ends up being the way that we burn food. It has a little on-off switch depending on how we communicate with our food about burning. and we're built to store, we're just communicating the wrong signals when we don't mean to. And so I love this researcher. She's from Australia. She's done a lot of work that really is translating to the clinic, to our guidelines. And it's really cool to see how the science has evolved from even 2008 to now. So I won't get too much into these details, but try your best the way that I see these chronic conditions, we have, imagine like you got plenty of gasoline, you got plenty of wood, you got plenty of fuel, something there that we can burn. And are you storing it? Does your garage look like kind of my garage there? Or does your garage look like my neighbor? Or does your lawn look like my neighbor's? So you're burning all that fuel, constantly mowing his lawn. These are kind of the way they kind of view these chronic conditions. If we're storing fat, we call it heart disease and triglyceride elevation and plaque formation. If we're storing sugar, we call that diabetes or prediabetes. If we're storing salt, we call it hypertension. So it's a little bit different than, again, the way that most doctors are viewing it. And it's really more the emerging science that we're talking about. And so as you go through enough of that storage and there's some damage to the plaque, this is where that third stage comes into play. And this is asymptomatic, asymptomatic heart disease. We might see a little bit of diastolic dysfunction on an echocardiogram, picture of the heart. We might see a little bit of plaque on the CAT scans that are being done. And so these are high risk folks. These are where a lot of other kind of medication therapies are warranted. I'm listing a lot of the different medications that you'll be seeing in clinic and the doctors using. They're including statins and aspirins and new medications to inhibit cholesterol. SGLT2I, these are the Jardiance and Farxiga. They have the best commercials on television, I think. The song and dance, I wish I could do that up here, but maybe next time. Fish oils. So, these guidelines I'm going to review with my colleagues and the heart doctors, but we're pretty much practicing this way, where you get a certain threshold, we jump to medicine. As you get to the most advanced stage, this is clinical cardiovascular disease, meaning you've had a heart attack, you've had a stroke, you've had atrial fibrillation. If you have kidney failure, we call that 4B. Typically we see even as you advance, you get kidney failure. And so again, more medications we talked about for your fibrates. For a wonderful medicine, I see a lot of clinical benefit for folks who are on Entresto. Entresto, we see a lot of symptom relief from these medications. Finerenone is another newer medication that it still has not really taken off too much, but it's growing, and a lot more people are getting on this medication for blood pressure and protein in the urine. We see other medications like calcium channel blockers and hydralazine isosorbide dinitrate. So again, there is guidelines for all of these conditions that we follow. I'm kind of just familiarizing you with the names of the medications. For diabetes, we talk about metformin. Metformin has been used since 1990, and it's really done amazing stuff to prevent. It's a gold standard to use in heart and kidney disease as well. But the newer classes of medications, we're seeing a lot more use from kidney doctors. We're prescribing medications, and heart doctors are prescribing these diabetic medications because they really do a lot of benefit for preventing those serious complications. But it really comes down to those early stages. And how do we combat those early stages before we need more and more and more medication therapy? And so, I'll leave you guys with a few different things here. I have a handout from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and I love it. I really like that as you start to incorporate any of the things, whether it's good sleep, good nutrition, good activity, we're really fighting those early stages of these conditions. I tell my patients in clinic, get plenty of beans and lentils, protein sources that maybe you're not familiar with. We may never have cooked like my mom, just constantly cooking lentils and Indian food. But they're really, really good protein sources that are filling. They're gonna stretch out that stomach, and they're very nutritious. Easy to use. There's great recipes, but fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, oatmeal is something that I advise my patients try to get a lot more of. And these are a lot different than what you hear. Again, we're very, very, very specialized. If you go to a kidney dietitian, where they're going to be very worried about phosphorus and potassium and these certain things, but we're trying to take a little bit more broader approach. How do you combat this? And so it's going to be individualized depending on the medications you're on. But I really like the folks that go through cardiac rehab and they're on the Pritikin diet. I mean, that's really the same thing that we're talking about. So I really like the kind of overlap between the heart program here. I tell my folks, actually, it does not matter if you're a vegan or a vegetarian or Pritikin, try to get plants. That's the key. 30 different plants per week. Those are the folks with the most diverse gut bacteria. And that's where this research is leading to. So we won't get, again, too much into the science behind it, but we see that folks that don't have these lactobacillus and bifidobacterium bacterium, those are the folks that are getting this metabolic dysfunction. And so every probiotic you pick up is going to say lactobacillus and we know that those are important. But again, it's not necessarily just taking something like that. It really comes down to getting in diverse and many different fiber sources. That's what these bacteria love to eat, digest on. The other very important thing for that muscle mass we talked about, try your best to the guidelines say 150 to 300 minutes of walk-in or moderate intensity exercise and some resistance. A couple days per week of adding a little bit of resistance or muscle building. Okay, so what I talked about here, I also, in my clinic, I say, this is what our moms told us. There's nothing different from get outside and eat your veggies from what our parents say. And so this is a very difficult thing. Actually, just today, if you were to look at, the journal, the Annals of Internal Medicine, that's a medical journal. And today I was reading and it said, there was an opinion piece. Should doctors even talk about lifestyle management with patients? I mean, should I even be here talking about lifestyle management? There was an argument against that, which is baffling to me. It's a resource intensive. I could be seeing more folks here. We see that it's not necessarily effective, and it's really hard to study this. It's really hard to know the benefits of what we're talking about because it costs a lot of money to do a research study where you follow someone for 2 years and strictly kind of lock them up and do just perfect studies like they do for drugs. So it's baffling to me because the science is actually very good, but I know it's very, very, very hard to implement. And that's where that last slide, that last page of the packet, they talk about social connection. And that's what this is. This is what we're here today. This is the real treatment. This is what I call the art of medicine. You know, I didn't appreciate, sometimes I skim over that last kind of page there for that lifestyle medicine packet, but social connection is extremely important. When I see folks in my clinic, they lose their parents. They've lost connection with family, or they never were married, or, you know, it's so hard to eat those fresh vegetables. They go bad. You know, you can't get 30 of them in a week. They'll go bad. And so just having purpose, I think it comes a lot from all the stuff we do, interacting with each other, communicating with each other. And that's where I think the real treatment here is. How do we combat these lifestyle changes? And so I'd like to share with you a couple things. I personally, I made a lot of lifestyle changes to help my blood pressure. It was high. I was on 2 medications. And I realized one important aspect of my life, you know, not needing any medications now and making these changes, it came from my painting. I love to paint. I've always loved to paint. I told my dad I wanted to go to art school, and he said, absolutely not. But I'm so happy that I kept it up as a hobby. And I shared it with my daughter. I taught her how to paint, and we painted this together. And you can see her confidence go up when she does something like this. And a very, very cool thing happened recently. So I've been following this gentleman in my clinic, and he wants me to share this. So it's, you know, I asked him first, but I've been following with my clinic for 3 years. And every year I see him in clinic, he tells me, you know, Doc, I wanted to do more poetry. He used to write poetry when he was younger. And every year I ask him, you know, he'd write in some poems. He's very funny. He gives me a little snippet of some of the poems he's working on, but he never really has put it together. And every year he talks about wanting to do it. And he talks about the importance of a journal. And so recently I went to India to go to my cousin's wedding. I didn't have any of my 4 kids with me. And I was like, let me try a journal. And I did a little art journal. I got back into it. And 2 months ago, I saw him in clinic, and I said, guess what? I've completed 3 journals since the last time I saw you. And I love it. Thank you for telling me about the importance of these things. And how's your poetry? And he told me, you know, I haven't done any more poetry. And I'm just so worried about my 11-year-old. He just got his cell phone and he's stuck to it. And all I'm thinking about is my grandchild. You know, he's stuck on his cell phone. And then he told me a story about that grandchild who went fishing in the fall and caught a big bass fish. And he told me that, you know, for 2-3 days, that kid was not on the cell phone, and he was having the time of his life just recalling this experience. And I said, do you have a picture of it? Let's paint it. Because I really think that communication, we all can get better we all have social connection. We all can get better visually, or music, or all the different ways we these social groups here as we learn from each other. There's all kinds of recipes over there. So I said, let's paint it. So I painted the picture of his grandson for him. I wanted to thank him for the journals and instilling that kind of a habit for me. And what came next? 2 days later, after I sent him that painting, in the mail came back something I wanted to share with you guys. And so, let's see here. Give me a minute. Okay. Fillet of soul. The teen just wanted to sit with his cell phone and stay. He wanted to be left alone with his games to play. He said no to his family, fresh air, and nature's bliss. This last chance of fall fishing he would gladly miss. But he couldn't escape. Father's wisdom and soon was dragged by his coat to the family pontoon. He sat motionless in the corner of the family boat, begrudging his rod, sat quietly and moped. The Great Spirit saw this and made a miracle that day. He chose to intervene and decided to play. All of a sudden, the teen's fishing rod shook. A tremendous black bass had been put on his hook. He fought the fish, who tugged for a while, then landed the bass, erupting a smile. The boy with his family was no longer mad, even kind of glad to be fishing with Dad. He wrote it. He finally wrote that poem he wanted to do. And I think it really is going to help his connection with his grandson. And we all can learn a lot when we do things for each other. That's the key thing here. That really is, I really want you guys to, there's a lot of lifestyle stuff we do. Thank you guys all for coming. Try your best to work on your own ways, your own art, your own communication, because that's where I think we all can make these good changes. And we'll keep trying our best as physicians as well to come in unison. So thank you guys. As a self-promotion, if you guys have any questions, please, I love to talk about the science. I would love to teach people how I paint, because I think that it's so easy. That's what I'm working on. How can we get people just for free to use technology, use things for good, to create something rather than consuming stuff that we do from technology. It's so easy to swipe, but how do we use technology to create paintings and make that a visual representation of each other? That's what I'm working on in the future, but thank you guys. Please, yes.
Do you guys have any questions?
Absolutely, yes.
What causes in the kidneys to release that, what do you call it, journal?
Glomerulus.
But I'm on a water pill, so it's releasing water out of the city. But in this last one test, they showed up that came in high. So then the doctor put me on a low dose of blood pressure. How does the blood pressure relief to make that not leak into your bloodstream?
Very good question. So, as we talked about, the components of the kidney, it takes a lot of energy. The biggest energy driver in the kidney, it's that thing that sucks up the blood, the filter back into the blood supply. So as we talked about kidney filtration, we're talking about 60 milliliters of water filtered through every single minute. 60 minutes per hour, 24 hours per day. You type 60 times 60 times 24. It's a lot of math, but we're talking about you're filtering 60, 70 liters of water through that filter every day. There's only 5 liters of water circulating around. Okay, so we're cleaning our blood, so many times over per day. And so we clean it over and over and over again. But we take those 60 liters, imagine if you have 60 liters of jugs and you move it from here to here. It takes a lot of muscle mass, it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so this is an energy issue. When you see the components of the kidney burning the right fuels at the right location, everything works in sync. And when it's burning healthy energy, it's very fascinating. If you look at that area that we're talking about that moves those 60 liters of water, they are not built to burn sugar. And so a healthy kidney, the genes that control our sugar metabolism, they're all down-regulated. They're not on. We don't have the enzymes to burn sugar in those areas. We burn fat. That's the key. That's where lots and lots of energy is stored in fat. However, that's not what we see in diabetes. That's not what we see in these chronic conditions. We see that it's in a state where that burning, it's not there. It's in that storage state. And so what do? They burn sugar instead. They burn a very quick fuel as like a short-term fix here. That's why this new medication, Jardiance and Farxiga, Invokana, that's what it does. It blocks the kidney from using sugar in that area. And that's where we see a lot of protein benefit from that. I mean, what it's doing is it's forcing the kidney to start burning a little bit of fat. Now you're burning the right fuel in the right location. That frees up fuel for these podocytes to be healthy. What we've been doing since 2000 is use lisinopril, losartan, these medications called ACE inhibitors or ARB. That's the standard of care, but it's changing. But what that does, when you reduce the pressure in the filter, you're going to see less protein leak through here. So that's why we use those medications. Again, they are medications that lower the pressure in the tiny blood vessels of the kidney. They trick the hormone regulation. So it's going to lower your blood pressure overall, but it really, really, really lowers the kidney filtration. I mean, it lowers the pressure in the kidney filter more so. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a beautiful system. It's like, it's cool. If every area of the component is burning the right fuel, then things just work in unison. If we start stealing fuel from one area, we start to see these dysfunctions. That's why it's so important that metabolically that where we burn fuel, it's our muscle. That's the water. That's the key. So what are the questions you got? Back in there.
My doctors check for protein.
Good question. So the question is, do the heart doctors check for protein and creatinine? And so, yes, this is, you can look at the labs in my chart, click the graph, and you'll see, in the last 4 years, probably 20 tests, because this is such a common test. That's why we get a lot of referrals for protein in the urine and low kidney function. And so it's recommended once a year, all patients with diabetes be checked for eye exams and protein in the urine, because these are some of the early signs that the tiny blood vessels are being hurt. Go ahead, sir.
And I'm being claimed that that's not understanding the cells have sign of restricted inventories and new male clinics. Elaborate on that, Paul?
Yes, I'm happy to. So, one of the patterns I've seen in my clinic is that balance is poor. We lose balance. I see a lot, almost, I told you I kind of built a timeline. I look at the triglycerides, I look at the blood pressure, I look at the different types of variables of metabolic syndrome, and I see a lot of these occur when we retire. When we retire and don't have necessarily hobbies that interact with a lot of people. It doesn't have to be physical hobbies. It could be getting out, playing cards. It could be really just social interaction. But I see that as we start to lose some of these hobbies, my patients get sick. And so for a long time, I've been telling my folks, work on your core, your stomach muscles, your glute muscles, all the muscles in the back of your leg. When you go to physical therapy, they're going to work on those muscles. Because when you have good balance muscles, you're able to do things you want to do. It's very, very cool to see that study. What that study is, it's a quantification. So even though we can see that it's important, when you hook up patients to sensors, we can test their grip strength. We can look at exactly their gait pattern. We can see, how they're walking, what's the distance in terms of their feet, every step that they take. Oh, I forgot to mention the question. Sorry. I'm supposed to mention the question. But we can also measure on a plate. Have the patient stand on a plate and have them close their eyes for 30 seconds and see how much sway they have. If they can do that, keep their eyes open and stand on your non-dominant foot and see how much sway you have. We can quantify it. And that's what the Mayo Clinic did 2 months ago. And that's what I was saying, that when we look at a number, if you see that there's balance off, you can almost tell that's someone in their 80s. And these are healthy patients. They're not on medicine. They don't have chronic conditions. That's a typical elderly person does lose a little bit of balance compared. Please, yes.
Is this going primarily about, Indian heart disease?
Yes.
I see in Travis, autoimmune disorder that I have, it complicates the issues.
Absolutely.
They interconnect. There you are. So,
Absolutely. And so that's a good question. Okay, so the question is going to be, we talk a lot about these conditions of diabetes, heart, and kidney. How do these other conditions play a role? And as mentioned earlier, although we've grouped these three together, I don't think it's limited to that. I think when you group in autoimmune, cognitive, cancer, all of these conditions we see are non-communicable diseases. And they all have underlying pinnings in the gut microbiome. That's the key thing here. How we develop a barrier between the outside world and our body, it's very, very, very thin between the outside world and our body when we talk about our intestines. And so most of our immune system lies right around the intestines. And so building a barrier between the internal part of your intestines, what the food is at, versus the inside of our body, where our immune system is at, that's the key. That's why fiber is so important. The way I describe it in clinic. So imagine you have a strainer, like a colander or something, and you run water. It's going to go right through. Okay? When we talk about fiber, there's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Think of soluble fiber as something that is water soluble. So you put oatmeal in water, it gets a little thick. You put some beans in water and you leave it, you boil it for a little bit, heat it, it gets thick, it gets gelatinous. That's soluble fiber. You put some type of gelatinous material on that colander and you run water, it's not strong enough. Water's going to go right through it. You put insoluble fiber, think of like carrots. That's like you put that in water, nothing happens. It just stays there. That's like scaffolding. And so now if you put some scaffolding down on that colander and you put this gelatinous material, you're creating this mucus barrier. And that's what fiber is. That's essentially what the bacteria that we see are low are digesting. And that's essentially training your immune system to not be so hyperactive. I do think that they're very much linked. Cancer, cognition, autoimmune conditions, all of these we see worsening. And when you look at the science behind them, they all have underpinnings of that gut microbiome. So that's why I really want you guys to, even though it's really challenging, if your muscle mass is low, you add 30 plants, you're not going to be able to eat anything because it's going to fill you up. But it's in unison. As we start to exercise and get a little bit more muscle mass, we'll tolerate a little bit more food. They go pairing together very, very well. These things are very challenging to do. It really comes down to those hobbies and interests in people.
Some of the balance issues that
Absolutely.
Throws your balance off completely unless you got some kind of relief in your ankles and your feet.
And this is where, like, having physical therapy, having your primary doctor. Some of the medications like metformin, wonderful medicine, but if you've been on metformin for 5 years, you should have a B12 checked. that's not always followed. You know, we sometimes miss those guidelines. And so it's a team-based approach. We don't get a lot of B12 in our diet. You know, that really, the B12 we get in our diet comes from meat. Our animals are supplemented with B12. So that's where we see a lot of, you might see a vegan patient, they're going to be B12 deficient potentially many times. We don't see it too often here, but like some of my family members and stuff. So it takes a lot of team-based approach, you know, to diagnose neuropathies, the back, the training. You know, you need kind of the full support. But if we can reverse that stuff, you know, if we can figure out causes, if we can work on it, and we're talking slow, steady improvements, that's the best thing to minimize the need for medicine. Because that medicine is a really fine balancing act. You know, if we lower your blood pressure, we're going to prevent strokes and heart attacks, but we're going to cause some falls. We're going to cause some, you know, kidney injuries. We're going to cause some, you know, you're not going to have the energy to necessarily do the things. And if we don't use the medicine, then we get the other side of the effects, you know, the strokes and heart attacks. And so we're trying our best to, this missing component, you know, make sure we're working on that part too. Yes, sir.
Yes, if you have esophageal issues,
Yeah.
and you're on a anti-acid supplement, and
Yeah.
that has its other whole setup. So you're talking about the gut biome, and so
Absolutely.
what do you think about that?
So it's exactly it. You know, the best medications we've used called PPIs or proton pump inhibitors, we don't see gastric ulcers anymore. I mean, that's something we learn about as a historical pinning because these medications are so good. I think that if you work on sleep, it improves it. If you work on diet, it improves it. I mean, you just try your best to make positive changes when you can so that we can rely a little bit less on medicine. But they're very good medicines. But yes, they have issues. They have definitely issues. It gets very confusing with the science behind PPIs in kidney disease. You know, that's one thing where you'll see a lot of debates. You know, does it cause kidney disease or does it not cause kidney disease? It certainly affects the acidity of your stomach, which is not good for the gut microbiome. But most bacteria we're talking about live in the colon. That's where getting something called resistant starches, like your potatoes, that, you know, you just want to prevent the overcooking of a lot of this stuff. There's some natural structure, and if we deliver this nutrition to the colon, that's where the key is. So a lot more to learn about this stuff here. And the really, really cool thing, the reason why it's all new, no one knew about the gut microbiome until they started doing all this DNA testing. And so a lot of the DNA technology we have, it comes from the early 2000 time period. That's where we tried to sequence the whole DNA of the human body, and we realized we're more bacteria than we are human. It was a big shocking thing because you try to grow out the bacteria on the cultures, you know, the petri dishes we have, they're not exactly like the environments in our bellies, so it's hard. So I'm happy that you know, we're learning a lot. You know, it's a beautiful thing about medicine that you know, we're constantly learning and how it applies, how the science applies to the care of our patients. You know, I really am very optimistic that of the future. So I just think we live in a very weird time where chronic conditions are so prevalent and worsening. But, you know, I really think that our job is kind of translating some of this stuff and how we can help folks doing the things they want to do. So any other questions you got? Or in Melrose, yeah. Cool. Cool.
Wonderful.
Thank you guys for letting me talk kidneys. And more.
Thank you.
Yep.
One's connected to the other and they all work together.
Yes, it is.